Okay, I'm back. This is Dr. Pat looking at the supply and demand part 2. So just kind of did this problem. Just a quick recap. The thing that's going on here is this is the math perspective of this problem from the math community. The reason being is both of these formulas are set up with P as the input. That means on the horizontal axis, and Q as the output in terms of Q on the vertical axis. We found out that this point of intersection is called the equilibrium point, and so that is the price that works just perfectly for everybody. And then if the price is higher than the price at the equilibrium point, if it's a higher price than 1333, then what happens is we have quantity of supply is bigger than the quantity in demand. That means more units are being produced and less units are being purchased. This area here, when this happens in this area, is called a surplus, when you have more items on your shelf than people are wanting to buy. On this side here, when the price is less than that equilibrium price, what's happening is it's a great price. People love it. Oh, I'm buying it. It's like crazy. But because it's at a lower price, not as many companies can produce it in order to make, somewhat of a profit. So they can't produce it. They're less efficient. And so in this area over here, this vertical distance that we're seeing, this is called shortage. Okay, we don't have enough units. We have a big quantity of demand and we don't have enough units being produced, and that's what creates a shortage. So there's not enough units on the shelf for all the people who want to buy it. Okay, so again, this is the math perspective. We're doing vertical lines here because this is the differences in the quantities, because quantity is on the vertical axis. All right, now this is set up this way once again because the input is P and the output is Q. But if you go to your econ classes, going to find out that that's not how it happens. So in your econ, what's really going to happen is, notice they put quantity on the horizontal and price on the vertical. It's done this way so that it's consistent with quantity always being on the horizontal for your revenue, your profit, your average cost, your cost graphs. So there's a reason why they want to keep consistent for those, so it matches those other graphs that they use. So they put quantity on the x-axis, even though quantity is technically the output of the relationship. We know the price, then we know the demand and the supply. So the quantities of demand and the quantities of supply. So even though the relationship is input is price, output is quantity, econ puts it this way. Now, where does shortage happen here? Where is surplus in this? All right, so once again, the equilibrium point is going to make no difference. As you can see in my previous example that I did with the equilibrium point, it's exactly the same numbers. They've just been switched. The x and y has been switched because that's what happens with your functions there. So the x and y's are switched because of the perspective. And so what happens there is our equilibrium points are the same numbers, but your x and y's got switched. So that's matching. So equilibrium point, basically the same thing as long as you keep track of who's who. All right, but in the previous slide, remember that when analyzing this, it was looking at the verticals because Q was in the vertical direction and we were looking for quantities. We knew the price and we were analyzing what's the difference in quantities. So when we look at it in the econ way perspective, quantity is now a horizontal axis, price is the vertical axis. So when we're talking about differences in quantities, we are now looking at a horizontal direction because it's just the way we put the axes. So what we're seeing here is, here's your equilibrium price. Prices that are lower means, prices are lower, people really want it. Demand has a larger quantity than supply. And so that's where we get our shortage. So our shortage is still in the direction of a smaller price, but because of the switch of the who's on the horizontal, who's vertical, the smaller price goes down and that means it's a left-right for the shortage. So shortage is below the equilibrium point for the econ, whereas in the math, shortage was to the left, which is kind of like another below. It's a smaller a horizontal value. So, and then for surplus, that would be over here. Surplus, remember, happens when the price goes up or higher than equilibrium price because less people want it. So that's why the quantity, the demand curve is to the, for this section of the graph above this equilibrium, it's to the left side, which means a smaller quantity. And so that means less people want it or demanding it. And so these horizontal lines represents the difference in quantity, because quantity is horizontal direction this time. And so that's a surplus because the supply graph point is farther to the right, meaning a larger quantity, and the demand graph over here is farther to the left. So that's the econ's perspective of when we're looking at it, how they draw their graphs. It's a horizontal game of supply and shortage because your quantity is in the horizontal direction. Whereas the math way of trying to keep that relationship the same, by putting Q in the vertical axis, that means the differences in quantities is a vertical perspective. And so that's why I was looking at it like this previously, in terms of higher quantity is higher up in this graph, and then lower quantities is lower. But if you switch that perspective horizontally, a larger quantity is to the right and a smaller quantity is to the left. Okay, hopefully, I apologize for this situation that was created, but it's two different groups looking at the same concept, but two different perspectives on where they want to put, that's developed by where we want to put the quantity. Is it on the vertical axis or is it on the horizontal axis? And that's what creates even more confusion. But it's still about the differences in quantities. So that's the key thing. Find that equilibrium price, and then if your price is smaller, you're going to get a shortage because people love it. They're going to buy it. If your price is higher than your equilibrium price, you're going to get a surplus. And that's basically the concept that we have for supply and demand. Thanks, and have a good day.